welcome back to Healthy Selfish. I'm your host, Monique Selman, and the owner of Becoming Enriched. So during Healthy Selfish, over the past 8 weeks, we have learned so many new things about boundaries, right? Understanding why it might feel selfish to set boundaries. How do we set boundaries with our family, the impact of not having boundaries, and everything in between. And today we are going to end with, I think, one of the most important things to understand about boundaries is how they should be flexible. You never want to consider the idea that we will set a rule and then it never changes. That's unrealistic because we're human and change is the natural way of the universe. All things change and you will too. As you grow and develop and evolve, I would hope that your boundaries do the same, right? Everything that you dislike, you might like later, and all the things that you love, you might not like eventually. And so we really want to learn how to communicate as our boundaries change, how we can deal with family members as we maybe cut them off or let them back into our lives. And so today we're all going to learn all about that kind of give and take flow that boundaries need to have. So the most important thing to understand is boundaries are meant to be flexible, right? It's not meant to be rigid. We have a real life behind us and we need to be able to allow our boundaries to change as we grow, right? That is not weak. It's not confusing. It's just flexible. And so sometimes people will say, well, you can't keep changing your mind or you can't, ask for this all the time. Now, there is some truth to that. We can't change your mind just every other day, depending on just how you're feeling. But if your boundaries have been steady for, months, and then with new information, you feel comfortable to change your mind, absolutely. Right. So the understanding is that boundaries should be semi-regular. So it should be steady, 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 a change, and then steady, 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 right? Not it's like this today, it's like that tomorrow, then on Thursday it's going to be like this, and then we back to the first one, and then we're off on somewhere new. No, that is not boundaries. That's just preference, right? You are just choosing what feels good in the moment, and that's not the same. Boundaries are made to help protect us and keep us safe emotionally, physically, and mentally. And so if your boundaries are changing constantly, there is no way that you are having emotional, mental, or physical safety. And so be mindful that flexible, not chaotic. So why flexibility matters? It's really about what we think about other people that this matters, right? Rigid boundaries have the idea behind them that people will never change, that you are who you are, the things that you've done in your past is you, and that never allows for people to kind of get out of the shadow of their mistakes, right? We don't always want to live under who we were. And so it's important that we really do allow people to change and grow with us and grow with our boundaries, because healthy boundaries say that change is possible, right? It's not assumed, but possible. And so we want to have the idea that people will work with us, they will work with our boundaries, and they'll help grow with us too. So flexibility leaves this room for growth, right? Without sacrificing safety. So we want to see some change before we start, changing those boundaries. So it always should be, you want to think the idea behind this is from Brené Brown. And she says, vulnerability and trust go hand in hand. And it's the same way when it comes to boundaries, right? We should never be so trusting that we have not paid attention to how vulnerable we have been, right? Because let's say you meet somebody, you click really well, and then you tell them everything about you, but you just met them, right? And so our trust actually is pretty low, but our vulnerability is really high. So we don't know what they're going to do with that, right? And so a healthy boundary would be I'm only going to tell people some information, and as I get to know them, I will let them in on more. Right? That is flexible. That is reasonable. A rigid boundary is this one person hurt me and I'm never telling anybody about my personal and private things ever again. Not everybody is the same, right? Not everybody acts that way. And so we want to leave some room for growth, ours and others. People do change. Now, there obviously are, right, a little asterisk with conditions, but people do change. And so we want to have the belief. Now, to be fair, before I even say this, I am an eternal optimist. I always tell my clients I'm going to sprinkle some optimism on you. But it's true. People do change, right? People go to therapy, people seek help, right? People go to rehab, right? People adjust behavior and they learn how to be better people over time and with maturity. And so that's why we want to always give the opportunity for people to prove to us that they are willing to respect our boundaries. Again, if the boundary is up, we shouldn't necessarily be having a ton of like hurts and pains and all those things, because the boundary was there to protect us from that preventatively. And so access should only be restored to people after they have consistent and changed behavior, right? We're not changing our boundaries based on promises. We can change our boundaries based on action. And so, how to spot change behavior. So this is essentially where we starting to notice that someone has not been respecting our boundaries, but maybe they are in the place where they're starting and they're willing, right? They've made the changes that we talked about. They went to therapy, but we're kind of suspicious. We don't really know if that behavior change is going to stick around. We don't know if it's like really, really solid and tight. We think it might be, but there's no telling. And so we want to start to just test a few things. And we're going to talk about some of the most important things to pay attention to and test when we are allowing people to come back into our lives, right? And allowing those boundaries to be a little bit flexible. So first is telling them that you do not want contact. This is a great way. So if we are setting up boundaries, they have broken your boundaries multiple times, and we've decided that it is enforcement time, like, hi, we will not be able to be, right, like close like we were because of these reasons. And so you want to just tell them like, hey, I'm done, right? Like, we've been trying this and it has been very difficult. It's drained me, right? I've given a lot to it, and I'm not interested in continuing to correct this behavior every single time it happens. And so I'll reach out when I'm ready. I'm not saying that we'll never be friends again, but I am saying for right now, I need a break. What we want to be looking for is, I understand. I hope to hear from you. That's how we know that things are changing, because there was no argument. Right? They didn't tell you that you're wrong. They didn't tell you that you need to think about it. Like, no, give them another chance, right? They restrained themselves to respect your views, opinions, and feelings. That's a really big deal, right? We have to allow for people to show us that they respect the boundary that we want to set. Now, it doesn't always have to be this boundary to test respect, but any boundary that you do set, if they're able to just hear you, acknowledge, maybe even ask a question about why you set that boundary to seek some clarity, wonderful. But as long as they say that they understand, right, they are willing to work with that and they hope to hear from you without trying to push and prod, that's a wonderful way to show that they are respecting your boundaries now. Second thing, right, how to spot change behavior. Test reliability. This is big because most, right, things where people are talking about boundaries are because someone's being very inconsistent. They'll say like, okay, well, we're going to show up here, and that person's an hour late, right, which is a huge disrespect to someone's time. And often, right, like that person ain't doing nothing so serious that they had to be an hour late. They were just like, oh, I got caught up and I was scrolling, and then I got in the shower, but then I had to do this and I got a little late, and then I just, right? And so a great way to test reliability is if they are able to just stick to a plan, right? It doesn't matter what the plan is. We'll talk about the one that I have for an example, but just test with a plan. So For this one, we're going to invite them somewhere. Let's say they show up on time, which was a big, right, boundary that you had set for them in the past. But also, and this is really important, no last minute chaos, no control attempts, right? When people are coming back into your life and we're trying to test reliability, we want to be able to have a smooth interaction. Like, it's not just being late. Sometimes it's the, oh, well, like, let's push back 15 minutes. Let's push back 30 minutes. And I don't know about you, but I feel like everybody has been in that position where you were going for the original time. You planned everything perfectly. And then they told you that they needed an extra hour or 30 minutes. And so then you tried to get something done in between all that. And then you end up overcommitting yourself. And now you late and you try. And so you didn't push it back because you're not going to. And it just causes chaos. And so, right, can they just say, oh, do you want to meet at IHOP at 12? Yes, I'll see you then. And then we actually see them then, right? Like, no, like, oh, well, what about Roosters instead? What if we went to like Applebee's? What if we went to Fleming's? Like, I don't really want to do, right? Like, we already made the plan. Why didn't you say that when we made the plan? And so really pay attention to this, because a lot of that chaos is some of the things that are like emotionally will drain you. And that's what you want to pay attention to. Consistency speaks louder than apologies. The third one in how to spot change behavior, testing emotional safety. So this is going to be really important for people who like maybe have had some breakages in relationships because of how they talk to them, language, communication. And so we want to test for emotional safety before getting back into any kind of relationship with someone, because emotional safety is what will help the relationship sustain long term. Right? If I am not safe to talk to you, if I'm not safe to discuss things that are a problem, right, the relationship cannot last because the communication will not last. And so some ways to test this is just bringing up a past issue that you want to address before the relationship continues and gets deeper, right? Notice how they respond to it, not what they say, but how they say these things and what they're doing. Are they curious about what the issue is? Are they asking good questions? Or like, oh, well, like, what happened? Why didn't you like that? What would you rather I do? Like, are they holding themselves accountable? Like, okay, I see how that makes sense for you and how that could hurt someone. Here's how I saw it, but I absolutely understand now. Like, that does make more sense, right? Because they are asking for context so that way they can understand and use that information in the future. If they are not doing that and they are like being defensive and they're like, well, you did this thing and so that's why I did this. Well, you never said that before and so why would I care? If they are just like pushing away and they're like minimizing what you're saying, like, well, that's not that big a deal. People do that all the time and they're okay, right? Like other people will do it and they won't be upset. No, right? All of these things are showing you that they're still not willing to listen to your boundaries and they're still not willing to respect you by respecting your boundaries. And so the other is joking at your expense. This is I cannot stress enough. Listen, when people are joking at your expense, right, and everybody is laughing at you, that is not a joke, right? They are making you honestly, you're getting a little bullied, right? It's not every time, but if all the time, somehow the joke always, you end up the butt of the joke, I need you to understand that that is a big problem. And some people will say like, oh, you can never take a joke. Oh, you're too sensitive. Maybe you are sensitive. Okay, so if I'm sensitive, you can't do this to me, right? You know that it's going to hurt my feelings. You know that I'm sensitive, right? You know that this is a problem. There are so many other things to make jokes about. Why does it have to be me? And so be mindful, right? Because you're not going to be safe if they won't stop doing that. And so emotional safety is going to be a really big thing to tell if you're going to be able to flex those boundaries or not. And so timelines, right? We're getting down to brass tacks. So this is about people who are going low and no contact, right? As we said before, right? Our boundaries are flexible. And so this is the big thing when it comes to flexible boundaries of like, if we have cut somebody off, how do we let them back in? How do we know it's time to let them back in? So we've already talked about the 3 ways to see changed behavior, right? Those are going to be great. So now let's talk about like the timeline though. So if you went low contact with somebody, and let me back up to actually explain low contact really quick. So low contact with a friend or a family member means that we have not necessarily blocked them. We have just talked to them less. Maybe we've kind of, pulled a little Homer Simpson into the bushes and just slid out of the way. And so that might just be like rare text, just following them on social media, but we're just not having the same engagement that we were. No contact, however, is when there is a full, complete shutoff of communication between the 2 people, right? No contact is much more serious because it is showing that like we cannot have any kind of relationship, right? I do not trust myself to know anything about you. I do not want to be in your social media. I don't want to see your content. I don't want to see your pictures. I just really need to remove you completely from my life. That is fair and fine. And I very much want to say that you can heal relationships from low contact and no contact. Only if the change behavior has happened though. So, low contact. I tell people that you should think about 3 to 6 months for like the first time you're going low contact with someone. 3 to 6 months is enough time to either give yourself time to reflect, which you should be doing, and understand why this felt necessary. What behavior were you doing to kind of contribute to this? Were you people pleasing for so long and the resentment built up, right? Were you struggling to communicate your boundaries with them, and so like they never really knew what to expect and they were just doing whatever they wanted without asking, right? And so really take some time to understand what your problems were with the relationship, so that way if and when you do decide to come back to a relationship, we know exactly what to discuss, we know exactly what the problem is, and we can really do something about it. And so after 3 to 6 months, being able to like see how you're feeling. Then if you still miss this person, you want them back into your life, we're ready to start again. After 3 to 6 months is a great time to reevaluate. However, and this is very important, after each repeat offense, the reevaluation period does get longer, right? And so let's say you are like, okay, it's been 6 months. Let me invite my mom, and let's say you want a little contact with your mom, to dinner. Does she show up? Right? Is she there? Does she say, okay, yep, I'll be there, and she's actually there? Boom, we got reliability. Like, is she able to just listen about why you had to have that 3 to 6 months low contact without interrupting, without telling you that you're wrong, without trying to change your mind about things, right? Is she respectful of your opinions, or is she still minimizing and being really defensive, right? In that, maybe we'll see a little bit of progress, right? Like, so she was reliable, we'll take the win. So maybe we're like, okay, let's keep the low contact for a little bit. Emotionally, I still don't feel safe, but I think that maybe we could still do, like, maybe we'll just go to a movie, right? Like, easy, simple, we don't have to talk, but we can spend time together. And then as time goes on, we'll keep testing how she's doing with emotional safety. And if she gets better, we can get closer. If she does not get better, we will keep it surface level. For no contact, this is much more serious. It is a really hard decision to go no contact with a friend or a family member, right? This is essentially a complete cutout of them from your life. And so if you do make that choice, hopefully you have done so with the help of a therapist or a close friend or family member to really consider why you need to go low contact and what that is going to look like, if you are going to even communicate that you're going low contact also. I think that you should wait 1 to 2 years before reconsidering for no contact, because blah words. Sorry, hold on. I'm going to start that last part back over. So when going no contact, I think you should wait at least 1 to 2 years before you reconsider, because it's such a significant breach that you need to give both of you time to not just calm down, but also to heal. Change takes time, right? The other person might spend at least the first year of that still blaming you. And so you need time to be able to see how your life is without them, right? You need to be able to regulate yourself and find the new normal. Let's say this person is someone like your partner. You have to learn how to live again all on your own. So really pay attention to the fact that, like, when we go no contact, like, there's going to be a lot more testing of emotional safety that you will have to do to be able to, right, again, heal that breach and let those boundaries be flexible. So time gives people the space to change. We want to give them space so they can see what they need to change for their own selves, right? We can see what we need to change for ourselves as well. So there are some special cases, right? Love is complicated. And so we do want to understand that there are some right, there's always some changes. So one, addiction. It is really difficult for families. I used to work in an addiction institute, and right, like, it's very hard because relapse is kind of a part of the process, right? If people are trying to get clean, they likely will relapse several times before they are able to have consistent and steady, right, streak. And so when families are in this with them, they're really hopeful each and every time they go into rehab. And then the disappointment is a really difficult crash afterwards. And so at some point, people in the family will decide that they cannot keep going, right? They can't keep doing the hopes and the disappointments, hopes and disappointment. And so they themselves need to pull back, either to low contact or no contact, whatever makes the most sense for them. And so you can still care deeply about this person, even if you are going low or no contact, right? And so now we're going to talk about what flexible boundaries would look like in this situation. Hoping selectively. So this might look like you're willing to help them get into rehab, right? But you're not willing to give them money. You are willing to, like, feed them and give them a meal, but we're not willing to just give them like a little prepaid Visa card so they can use however, right? And so you can choose what you're willing to give and what you're not willing to give. Again, you get to decide your boundaries, not other people. You can also limit access to yourself, right? And that's that low contact. So you can come over here when you're sober. If you're not sober, I do not want you in my home. Very clear boundary, very understandable. And so being able to understand that, like, you will have to see where the line lies. We talked about this in episode 2, that you have to feel what you're acknowledging when it comes to your emotions. And so in episode 2, we spoke about how to acknowledge where your boundary should be. And it's always based on your feelings, right? If we're getting angry, if we're getting resentful, if we're being anxious, right? That's going to let us know that a boundary likely needs to be set there, right? And so pay attention to how your emotions respond to the world, and then, right, set your boundaries accordingly. So repairing a boundary violation. So let's say that somebody did break the boundary. How do we do this? How do we go make amends? Let's say I broke the boundary. How do I help? How do I fix this relationship? So if you're healing a relationship, there are some non-negotiables. Accountability, the biggest one. You have to acknowledge the hurt you caused. Even if it was not intentional, intention does not change impact. And so you have to acknowledge whatever the impact was on that person. Accountability is one of the best things that you can do for relationships. Second, change behavior. Are you acting different? If you are acting the exact same, stay where you were. Like, there's no point in us doing all this rigmarole just to be in the same spot. And so we do have to change. Again, even if that change is not steady, right, we need to see it consistently coming out, right? Most of the time, if not all the time. And then last is just validating your experience. Nobody wants to fight for their opinion every single time they have a conversation. Sometimes we really just need to hear, like, thank you for letting me know. I appreciate you sharing that with me. That's it. That's all it takes to validate somebody's experience, is to feel heard, right? To be loved is to be seen. And so we want to know that our people hear us, see our pains and see our joys. So love without responsibility is not repair. So what healthy selfish really means, right? Healthy selfish is not choosing yourself all the time. It's choosing yourself when it matters, right? We want to consider ourselves and then consider others. Right now, most people are considering others and then they never get around to considering themselves. Healthy selfish wants you to find the sweet spot right in the middle where we are able to acknowledge what we need and then give to others with a free and open heart, right? It's balance. It's maturity. That's the work that we want to be doing. That's how we start to acknowledge what is important to us. And so, thank you so much for being here for these 8 weeks. I have had such a great time teaching about boundaries and about what the healthy selfish lifestyle really means. If you are interested in learning more, right, the Healthy Selfish book will be out this year in October. I cannot wait to share it with you. If you want updates, please go ahead and follow me on all social media platforms at Becoming Enriched. And I hope you have a great day and set some wonderful boundaries. Bye.